Hey everyone, and welcome back to another College Chats podcast. Well, the college football season so far has had more twists and turns than an Orlando theme park ride, which is good as our guest is based in Orlando, or certainly in Central Florida. So, and he also knows a thing or two about the college football season. But first, as you know, with the College Chaps, I'm George, joined by Oliver this week. Ollie, how are you, my friend?
We don't sound so thrilled about it, George. You're exactly right with your definition and description of the college football season so far, and I think week four kind of highlighted that, right? Who saw Navy beating Memphis? Who saw BYU beating Kansas State? We could go on. Who saw Florida absolutely curb stomping Mississippi State? You just go on and on and on. There's so many shocks, surprises, upsets, twists and turns. I absolutely love it, and I'm looking forward to getting into breaking down some of the key storylines from last week, and looking forward to what is, I think, people would probably say the best week of college football from a big marquee matchup so that we've had so far this season.
I think so, and so we'll get onto that shortly. But about our guest, when Billy Napier called out opinionated Floridians in their basements, we thought, who should we call to test this theory out? This is our guest's second appearance on College Chaps, although we will need to go some way to catch up with his appearances on the Paul Feinbaum show. So it's great to welcome back Saturday Down South senior national columnist and podcast host Connor O'Gara. Connor, hi, how are you?
Great guys. It is so great to be with you. Yeah, look, Billy Napier was dead wrong because we don't have basements in Central Florida. When he said that, I'm like, gosh, this guy might be truly in over his head. If he doesn't know that we don't do basements, because especially now during hurricane season, you don't want to be having a basement. That thing's gonna flood in 2 seconds here. That's just, man, to me, just another sign that things are not going Billy Napier's way in 2024.
Well, they're not, although it took a twist for the better last weekend. But amazingly, this might be the first time on this podcast this season we're not going to talk about Florida and Billy Napier. So Billy can't take ire at what we're about to say. Anyway, let's. Ollie did talk about what had happened over last week. And there was some real big headline news to come out of it. And I can't think of a bigger headline than what happened in the Tennessee Oklahoma game because well, listen, if you thought that the Oklahoma offense was going to have that start to that game and the quarterback Jackson Arnold was going to be benched by halftime, then go and buy yourself a lottery ticket, because I don't think anybody saw that coming. We've seen this week already that Venables has announced Michael Hawkins as the starting quarterback for this week coming. Oh, sorry, they've got a bye week, haven't they? What does this mean for Oklahoma, Connor? What does it mean for Jackson Arnold? Start first of all. What does it mean for Oklahoma, and what does it mean for their playoff hopes?
Yeah, George, we were there at SEC Media Days, and so was Jackson Arnold as a redshirt freshman quarterback and a guy that seemingly had everything in front of him. You know, people forget in his recruiting class, he was right behind Nico Iamaleava and right behind Arch Manning. He was like the third, I think he was the third guy in that class. I think he was 10th overall in the 2023 quarterback class. And somebody that, look, if you had talked to Oklahoma fans in the offseason, it was, this is the guy. This is why we're not worried about the fact that Dylan Gabriel, wanted a new opportunity and left for Oregon. It's, we're going to be fine with Jackson Arnold, with Seth Luttrell running this offense, and everything is going to be okay. It took less than a half of SEC football for Oklahoma fans to realize, oh boy, this ain't it. And I feel for Jackson Arnold because while he has not performed to the level that I think he would hold himself to, I mean, he gets pulled after they had 9 consecutive plays that went for 0 or negative yardage. This is still not the offense he thought he was going to be running. They have dealt with injuries at the receiver position that have gone largely unnoticed. The Jaden Gibson injury early in fall camp was devastating. Nick Anderson goes down with a fall camp injury that sidelined him for the first 3 games. He comes back for this game against Tennessee, and then the second series, he's down and out. And that was supposed to be his big deep threat, his home run hitting guy. They had a broken foot that Jaleel Farouk suffered in the season opener, and they've been without him. Like this group was supposed to be a strength. And instead, it has not been there. And he doesn't really have anybody outside of Deion Burks that he can trust in that offense. And even in that Tennessee game where they were not winning that battle up front, it was very evident that he was overwhelmed. And just what a bad start this is for the Oklahoma offense. So the good news is that they have a defense and they're going to try and play to this style. And that'll begin this weekend with their trip to Auburn. They're going to try and play to this style where they're going to try and run the football more with Michael Hawkins Jr. stepping in as a true freshman. And they're going to try and just play ball control, win these games 21-17, make it ugly. Essentially do what Tennessee did to them. I mean, they would like to be able to do that. They didn't ask Nico Iamaleava to do a whole lot in that offense with 13 completions in that game, and they stuck to the run. But yeah, Oklahoma's playoff chances, I think, are looking very, very bleak at best at this point with how much they have struggled to establish an offensive identity through 4 weeks.
Yeah, good. Sorry, you're right. I made a mistake. They don't have a bye. They've got bye following week. They've got Auburn this week, and well, Auburn are no great shakes. But I would have thought that confidence has been knocked a little bit in the Sooner camp, and they've got some pretty tricky games still to come in the schedule. It's not like they've got the harder game. I mean, they've got the Red River coming up, for heaven's sake. So I guess the bye week possibly comes at the right time for them, depending on how the Auburn games goes. But certainly going to be a really tricky. Next few games are going to be very difficult for Sooners fans, I think, to be able to see how this is going to shape out.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. This is a team right now that, look, I think when you looked at that over under in the offseason of 7.5 regular season wins, Oklahoma fans scoffed at it. They're like, come on, what? I get it. We have to answer the question, are we SEC ready? But what are we talking about here? And the point I brought up was, well, look, I like Oklahoma a lot. I had Oklahoma going 9-3, so I thought they were going to hit that over. But reality was they were facing 6 teams in SEC play that won at least 9 games last year. Texas was only going to be tasked with facing 2 SEC teams that won 8 games last year, one of which being Oklahoma, and then the other being Georgia. They had night and day schedules. So there was a reason why we were talking about Oklahoma and Texas in such different regards coming into the season, despite the fact that Texas is a year ahead with Sark than where Venables is. I think it was the schedule, and that was a big part of it. And it's only going to get more difficult. And I think that's why some of the pressure mounted and why Brent Venables perhaps went in this direction, realizing there's really not a whole lot of room for error. They have to figure things out now, because if they don't, all of a sudden you're staring at potentially 6-6, which Brent Venables did 2 years ago.
Yeah, and you made a good point about SEC Media Days, because I've got this fantastic photograph of when Jackson Arnold appeared on the podium, and I hadn't quite seen that kind of scrum so far, right, over the last year that I'd been there. I mean, there was just a huge amount of press attention on it, whereas Josh Heupel left Nico at home, right? And he said, he didn't say anything about his quarterback. He just said he had other better, more experienced players to bring. I just wonder if the pressure's been too much in that respect, and they've been found wanting. But yeah, an interesting weekend, that's for sure.
I asked him about that too. I was the one that asked Heupel, like, why don't you bring Nico here? We had, I think, what do we have, like 11 or 12 quarterbacks that were at SEC Media Days, and someone like Jackson Arnold, who's the same age as Nico and went through very similar experience, 5-star guy, gets to have his first career start in the bowl game. Nico wins his start, Arnold doesn't, and yeah, I mean, it's been played very differently. I think the surroundings are definitely better at Tennessee with what they have to work with in the passing game, the offensive line, and those things. They've answered those questions. But yeah, man, it has just been it's been very frustrating, I think, for Oklahoma to see this play out at the start of their time in the SEC.
It's funny because Jackson, there's not a quarterback in the country who, when you get down to the red zone, converts red zone opportunities into touchdowns better than Jackson Arnold. It's just Oklahoma haven't been able to get down that far. And a team that's having a similar quarterback struggle and situation, the two teams meet at probably the right time, is obviously Auburn. Hugh Freeze. He's obviously been very vocal about the quarterback situation, and quarterbacks that have been a part of Hugh Freeze's situation have also been equally vocal. What is the situation at Auburn? What does it mean for Freeze? I think is a question that not enough people are asking, and the rest of the season for the Tigers, which almost looks like it's a lost season already.
It's a disaster. I mean, to think that they already have 2 losses at Jordan-Hare this season, I mean, it used to be if you lose 2 games at Jordan-Hare, it's like a horrible year for Auburn. And they've done that, and the calendar hasn't even turned October yet. They could have 3 losses at home by the time the calendar turns to October. And it's, in my opinion, in large part because of how Hugh Freeze has managed this quarterback situation. Last December, he makes the decision to not go into the transfer portal. He's like, we're gonna go with Peyton Thorne year 2. We're gonna trust that another year in my system, I'm gonna take more control of the play calling duties. It's gonna work, and we're gonna surround him with these stud receivers that we get from the portal, that we get from the recruiting trail, and we're just gonna make life easier on Peyton Thorne. Well, you know what? It doesn't really work is when you make life easier on a guy that doesn't know how to make things easier on himself. And that's the situation that's played out so far at Auburn. And so Peyton Thorne gets benched, obviously, and Hank Brown is kind of billed as the savior, a guy who's very lightly recruited, but because he played okay in the bowl game last year, Hugh Freeze was willing to say, all right, what we've seen in practice suggests that you could maybe step in. And the guy throws 3 picks in the first half, and they're bad picks. I mean, like the type of picks that get you sent to the bench, and you're going to be wondering maybe a couple of years from now if you're ever going to get another opportunity. Like it was that bad. And for Hugh Freeze to have his comments after the game where he's like, yeah, we need to find quarterbacks who like will stop turning the football over. It's like, buddy, you had the resources to go out and get those guys. This isn't an excuse you can use in the portal era. You yourself said you weren't willing to spend 7 figures on a quarterback. And there are situations that haven't worked in the portal with the quarterback position. And there are situations like Cam Ward at Miami, like Jordan McLeod at Texas State, a guy that was in the portal for like 3 months out of James Madison. And you could have had one of these guys. And instead you decide, you know what? No, we're gonna stick to our guns here, and we're gonna run it back with this guy. And it's been a disaster. Like it's been a total disaster. And so for Hugh Freeze, yeah, his seat is about to get a whole lot hotter in year 2. And I don't think he gets fired in year 2 like his predecessor Brian Harsin did. I think Hugh Freeze, having Southern roots, as frustrating as that is for me to say as someone that doesn't necessarily come from this area of the country, I think that will benefit him and give him a year 3, but he'll be on everybody's hot seat going into year 3. It very much looks like a situation that doesn't really have an answer, and they have no answer whatsoever at the quarterback position.
You talk about that contrast between the situation with Hugh Freeze and the situation with Brian Harsin. How much of that do you think is sort of the lenience and the length of string? How much do you think that is? I was going to be careful of how I worded it, but I won't. The act that is Hugh Freeze, because he comes across, as we've talked about it on this podcast before, in recruiting, and we saw him on game day at the start of his Auburn tenure last year. He comes across as a guy who is extremely charming, a guy who can talk a good game. Like, how much of that actually buys him a little bit of time, do you think, compared to someone like Brian Harlan? Harsin, sorry, not Harlan.
Yeah, I think it will buy him some time because unlike Brian Harsin, all indications are that Hugh Freeze has been willing to schmooze and do the things that you probably need to do when you're the Auburn head coach. Like, hey, if Bo Jackson is hosting an event, you need to be there. Like that's part of your job as the CEO of this program. Hey, the transfer portal, we need to actually use this. And you're not just going to be able to develop like 3 or maybe borderline 4-star recruits and hope that it works out 3 or 4 years from now. Like that's just not going to work. And Hugh Freeze has understood that part of the job. And he's gone out. And if you look at the way that he's recruited on the high school level, that probably will buy him some time. And it probably won't be like as dire of a situation as it was with Brian Harsin with the coup to get him fired after year 1, which is just one of the peak SEC stories you can think of in recent memory. But the irony is that I don't know how much grace Hugh Freeze deserves. I don't know how much he's going to be able to show in year 2 that says, without a doubt, things are heading in the right direction. I mean, the Arkansas game is a perfect illustration of that. Last year, Arkansas got waxed in that game, a game that Arkansas desperately needed. And when they lost that game and missed out on bowl eligibility, the thinking was kind of like, maybe that's curtains for the Sam Pittman era at Arkansas. And instead, they run it back with Sam Pittman. Arno Juracek gives Sam Pittman grace for another year. He goes out and gets Bobby Petrino to run his offense. And a year later, what do they do at Auburn? They win that game, and not necessarily because their offense was blistering, but because they had a more disciplined football team. And to me, it's really telling if you're going to see things like that in year two, and it does not bode well for the future of Hugh Freeze. And I would not be feeling too good if I was somebody that had high expectations of him, like I may or may not have by predicting them to go 8-4.
It feels like we could spend the whole podcast talking about Hugh Freeze. I mean, the Auburn boosters are legendary here, right? I guess they wanted rid of Harson because they never wanted Harson in the first place, and I guess Hugh Freeze maybe gets a bit more grace because talking to the Auburn media at SC Media Days, they were right behind him, but certainly his actions over the last couple of days have been quite something, and the spat he had with Paul Wallace was quite the eye opener. But talking about coaches on the hot seat, a coach that threw himself on the hot seat this weekend is Mack Brown, and that was talking of eye openers. Maybe that didn't grab the headlines it perhaps should have, but that scoreline on Saturday was quite something. Maybe it wasn't a surprise to the likes of Oliver, who has been flying that flag for some time, but nonetheless, North Carolina is a storied program. Mack Brown said after the game that he'd said to the players, "Listen, if I'm part of the problem, I'll walk away." And I guess my question, Connor, is: was it a bad day at the office, or was Mack Brown nearing the end of his career?
He is. He's almost there. I think if this isn't his last season, it's next year. It's something like that. I don't think that, and I hate to point to the age thing because who knows? I mean, college football is crazy. Like he could win a game in the next couple of weeks, and all of a sudden we're seeing a Mack Brown dancing video, and we're like, this guy's 72. Like, what are we talking about here? This guy's the same age as Nick Saban. There will be probably some of those moments that happen, but everybody's kind of wondering, like, all right, what's it going to look like once Sam Howell isn't there anymore and Drake May's not there anymore, and you don't have this, unbelievable pipeline of quarterbacks to work with. And ironically, the offense isn't the problem. It's been the defense so far. And the defense was good to start off the year. And it's actually my guy Jeff Collins, who I've become friendly with, and somebody that I was texting with after the season opener, after they beat Minnesota, just like, yeah, so happy for you, man. Like, know how much this means to you. And Gene Chizik was my guy last year, somebody that I got to spend a good amount of time with during his days with the SEC network, and getting to know him a little bit and seeing how much they bought into Mac.
Mm-hmm.
And I think kids love Mac. I think kids see that guy and understand, oh, it's not just that he was the guy who coached Vince Young to a national championship, however you want to phrase it. I think they see someone that's truly invested in them. You saw that play out with the Tez Walker situation last year, this guy that needed to get eligibility. And it was a joke that the NCAA dragged its feet as long as it did and got all technical with some of those rules. And you saw how Mac went to bat for his guy. There's still some of that in him, but if it's results like this where they're getting blown out by James Madison, Mac himself won't have to get fired. He will step down and realize I'm not really in this anymore in the way that I thought I was, and it's okay if that happens, because I still think that despite the side by side with he and Larry Fedora, I think they have the same record right now at this stage, which is kind of a wild thought. I still think he brought that program to national relevance, and that's a positive thing, but I would expect him to have the right amount of self-awareness to decide when his time is up.
Yeah, I think the fact that he is still in a job now on the Tuesday as we record this is a testament to what you just said there, Connor, about the player power and the relationships that he builds with those players and the respect he commands from even those, the youngest of players in that North Carolina locker room. Because I think if one or two dissenting voices in the locker room had said, "Coach, this is your," he'd be out by now. Either Sunday morning, that would have been it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so, because go back to like 2015, Steve Spurrier is a good example of this. Mid-season, realizes I don't have it. I'm done. Stick a fork in me. And that kind of left a bitter taste in the mouths of South Carolina fans that saw this guy that totally rebuilt their program, that just decided mid-season, I'm done and I can't do this anymore. It's like, man, I get it. There's no ideal perfect time to walk away. Even Nick Saban, the time that he walks away, he gets exposed to the 30-day window, or Bama gets exposed to the 30-day window, and it's kind of a feeding frenzy. It's a difficult thing to have to manage that. Time will tell if the effects of that will impact this roster in 2024. But man, I hope that we don't see a situation like that. I would like to see a world in which he could kind of get that swan song that I feel like Mack Brown at this stage of his career deserves. I mean, he's one of 3 active coaches in college football that can say, yep, I won a national championship. And obviously, that's a big part of his legacy, and he deserves to have that be a big part of his legacy. But I would hope that if that announcement does come and it's a post-game realization or something like that, that it would kind of be, all right, here's the plan. This is going to be, we don't have a coach in waiting, but just know that we're going to hire the right person for this job, and I'm going to call it a career at the end of the season.
You mentioned Nick Saban. You mentioned the Alabama 2024 roster. Let's talk about arguably the marquee game of the season. Even, we've talked about it being the best game of week 5, but for a lot of people, this game is going to be the one that defines the 2024 college football season. Alabama, Georgia. Start with the Bulldogs, and a team that it seems like every year we go through the same situation with Georgia early in the season where they kind of slide under the national radar because there's someone else. This year it's Texas kind of taking the limelight, and Georgia has a bad game against this SEC opponent that they should have absolutely whooped off the park. This year it was Kentucky. They're not really in people's mindset right now as being the best team in college football. That's a situation that suits Kirby Smart down to the ground, right?
It's perfect. I mean, I think he would have preferred to go into Lexington and dominate. Like, let's not get it twisted. I think he'd like to see his team play really perfect football, but you're right. I mean, the spin zone for Kirby and the way that he can convey this message to his team is, look, you just dropped to number 2 in the country. You aren't being talked about in the same way that Texas is. You are coming off of a game in which there were a lot of mistakes made, and maybe there's going to be some people saying that you're not going to get over this Alabama hurdle, which for Kirby, it still is. To me, it's not just the Nick Saban thing. Until we see him actually beat Alabama, I'm going to call this an Alabama thing for Kirby. He's 1-5 in his career against Alabama, Nick Saban, that version of Alabama. We'll see if that version of Alabama still exists under Kalen DeBoer. But yeah, I think Kirby gets to spin this as, guys, we're the ones going into hostile territory. We have the ability to do something that we haven't been able to do. I mean, I was talking about this with my guy, Wes Blankenship, who is a Bulldog through and through, covered the team, went to Georgia and all that stuff. But like, one of the things we were breaking down is, what's the best road win that Kirby's had? He's had great neutral site wins. You could point to a lot of those: Rose Bowl, national championships, of course, stuff like that. But what's the best instance of Kirby Smart going into someone's house and saying, not today? It's probably 2017 Notre Dame, if we're being honest. And that was a really nice showing. This would be a step above that. And I think this matters so much to Kirby after the way that it played out last year with the SEC championship. I don't think he can ever catch Saban. I really don't. I think that ship has sailed, because when you're 1-5 against him, I don't care how many rings you have, that matters. But this is an important game, even in the 12-team playoff era where there's more room for error. I think that this game is just monumental for the psyche of both programs.
It's a huge game in many ways, Connor. This is undoubtedly, if you look at the schedule, this is the toughest game that Georgia have had so far, but it also kicks off a 4-game stretch, which ends up with them playing Texas. So this is very important for Kirby Smart in terms of not only building momentum, but getting confidence into the program. What do you think are the key battles that Georgia have to win in this game to come away from Tuscaloosa with a victory?
Got to find some answers for Jalen Milroe. And last year in that SEC championship, 2 different versions of Jalen Milroe played out in the final 10 minutes of that game. Jalen Milroe, the passer, picked them apart on that drive that they were able to make it a 10-point game. And then when Georgia was desperate to get the football back, Kirby's like, guys, I just need one defensive stop. You saw the legs of Jalen Milroe take over, and it's a 30-yard run to pick up a first down, a 9-yard run to pick up a first down, and that's all she wrote. That's not the type of thing that typically happens to Kirby Smart. And I'm so interested to see how he comes out and how he attacks Jalen Milroe, who is still playing in his 4th game in this offense. And I think that so far he's really mastered some of these I shouldn't say mastered. That's probably a bit too strong. I think he's really worked to improve the areas of his game that he knows he gets criticized for, the intermediate passing. We're not seeing high volume. He's never going to be a guy that throws the football 35 times a game. But is he a guy that's capable of making one or two of those throws over the course of an afternoon that just makes you go, dang, that was a big time first down in a huge spot. He is making those throws on a weekly basis. And I can't wait to see how Kirby is able to attack him, because that's what you're going to have to do. Does Jalen Walker live in Jalen Milroe's ear? Maybe he does in this one. He certainly lived in Brock Vandegrift's ear. There's no doubt about that. But nobody has beat Kirby Smart twice except for Joe Burrow. It's the only guy that's done that twice. Can Jalen Milroe join that company? Can he be that guy that puts himself in a different echelon? Because Lord knows many have tried and many have come up short. And I can't wait to see what we see from this Georgia defense and attacking somebody that, for my money, is one of the probably 5 best players in all of college football.
Kalen DeBoer said last week on the SEC coaches teleconference call that we won't see the full Alabama offense this year. They're gonna hold back, presumably to let everything bed down. To whose advantage do you think that is on Saturday? Do you think that's to Kirby Smart's advantage, or is that to Alabama's advantage?
Could be to both. Could be to both. Like, I kind of wanted to see him throw the football a little bit more in the first part of the season, just because I want to see Jalen Miller get these reps. I want to see what it looks like with these new receivers. You have Jeremy Bernard coming over from Washington. Everybody's been talking about 17-year-old Ryan Williams stepping in. Did you guys know he's 17? They tell you after every single catch. It's unbelievable. He should be at his high school prom. No, it's incredible to think what these guys have been able to come in and do. Jamarcus Shepard, the receivers coach who came over from Washington, deserves a lot of credit for that. But yeah, maybe they have had kind of a stripped down version of this offense. I went into that Wisconsin game thinking Bama doesn't need to recreate the wheel here. This doesn't need to be a crazy scheme game. If they run the ball up the middle, they're going to be able to win those battles up front. And sure enough, that's what they were able to do. And they had obviously splash plays in the passing game as well. But yeah, I mean, it's possible we're going to see some more wrinkles. Maybe we are going to see a little bit more of that passing game, the route tree open up a bit. We're going to see Milroe throwing on the move a bit more with some of these design rollouts. Like, I would not rule that out. That would benefit Alabama, I would think. But if they don't have the reps doing this, it's not a guarantee that all of a sudden they're going to be able to master some of these things. I do think that Kirby Smart, he adjusts extremely well, and he'll be ready for whatever Bama's going to throw at him.
Okay, so let's put reputations on the line then. So predictions for Saturday. Connor, you're a guest. You get to go. You get to go first.
I'm really tempted to take Bama at home. Game in which Bama's its biggest home underdog since 2007. I predicted Jalen Milroe to win the Heisman Trophy. I predicted Bama to make the playoff. I'm very tempted to say this is going to be a moment in which other people start to get on board with that. But I'm not picking against Georgia. I'm not. I still think Georgia was my pick to win a national championship. I still think they win an SEC championship. And this is a pivotal game for Kirby's legacy. I think it means so much to him to show that he is capable of winning a game like this on the road, hostile atmosphere, and doing so in that building will mean that much more. Yes, pun very much intended. I think that Bama maybe gets out to an early lead, but Carson Beck, we're going to see the poise play out in this one, and a fascinating back and forth game that lives up to the hype ultimately goes Georgia's way.
Ollie, where do you see this going?
Well, just to Connor's point about Ryan Williams being 17, I absolutely love it when they talk about Ryan Williams being 17, because we have an article about the youngest college football players. Every time they mention Ryan Williams is 17, it goes off. So I absolutely love it. I see, and part of my head and a little bit of my leg thinks Alabama 23, Georgia 21. But then I think about the fact that Georgia is coming into this game like pissed because of that Kentucky game. And I think that's the key. If they'd have blown away Kentucky 51-14 or something like that, I think they come into this game with a different mindset, which is ridiculous because it's Alabama. But there is always that feeling with Georgia when they're doubted, wherever, and they feed on it, like you mentioned earlier. Like you kind of can't root or bet against them in that situation. But I think it'd be incredibly tight. I think it's 23-21. I'm going to say Georgia for the purposes of this podcast, but I'm going to write 23-21 Alabama in an article, and then I've got all my bases covered.
That's I love the hedge. You got to hedge in this business, man. It's an important part of what we do.
If only it was in Athens, and then there would be an actual hedge.
Oh, that's new hedges too. New hedges this year that they put in. That's a great point.
There we go.
Yeah, professional. I wonder if Tuscaloosa can be the factor, right? Because you're right, Connor. The Georgia are heavy favourites for this game, and well, they are favourites for the game, and I think we're still to see what Kalen DeBoer's offense looks like, right? So, I just wonder if Bryant Denny will be absolutely jumping. I believe Donald Trump is going to be there to add to the spectacle and the occasion. I was in Bryant Denny the last time Donald Trump was in the stadium. If the atmosphere is anything like it was that day, which was LSU 2019, it's going to be off the scale, and I just wonder whether Alabama can pull off what would be a shock result. Unlike Ollie, I think this game might get into the 30s. And I can't be wearing this shirt and predict a Georgia win. That's for sure. So, I think they're split
every week, George. Every week we talk about your SEC bias, and now it's your Alabama bias, which is like slightly creeping in at the end here.
Slightly creeping in.
Just slightly creeping in. Look, we're getting close on time, so yep. Let's rattle through a subject close to my heart. Group of 5 teams causing chaos. We talked about James Madison earlier, and we talked about in the intro, Memphis losing to Navy has cast all sorts of chaos onto the college football playoff. Kind of for your money, he was looking like the best bet for the group of 5. And I'd like to point out potentially more than one group of 5 injury. A lot of people out there writing and saying it's one guaranteed spot for the group of 5. That's not the letter of the law, as we spoke about with Rich Clark last week. But for your money, who's the best group of 5 team with the best chance of making it into the college football playoff?
Boise State probably has the advantage right now, and they're going to get a lot of credit for a close loss against Oregon. Gosh, I really liked Memphis, and I still don't want to bail on Memphis. And I know that was an ugly loss. Losing to Navy like that after you beat FSU in the Norvell reunion, like just a brutal setback. I've been going on Memphis radio every other week for the last 6 years, and I was on this morning. And so I actually talk a decent amount of Memphis stuff, if you can believe it. But the amount of frustration that I think some of these group of 5 teams have had in the first part, where you feel like you're like a Northern Illinois to win that game in South Bend and then to lose to Buffalo, you're like just reminded it's such a grind. It's such an absolute grind. So I'm going to hedge. I'm going to do what you did. I'm going to hedge. I'm going to say Boise State or the AAC winner, which I still believe will be Memphis.
Too much hedging on this podcast for my liking. But it's helpful in that it brings us nicely to our final segment, which is tickets under 20. I can't remember, Connor, if you did this last time you were on. It was only a year ago, and I can't remember if we did it with you. But anyway, the premise is we have to go over the rules since Emily Grace McWhirter came in and ripped up the rule book and started hiring private jets to fly all over the place. You can go to as many games as you can get to, but the premise is that you're able to travel there in your own public transport or your car, whatever. Just so that we set the bar higher, we'll let Ollie go first because he likes to crisscross the country.
Yeah, I do, and it's good this week because there's no Friday game where you can get a ticket for 20 quid. So I have a whole day of travel time. So you better believe I'm going to Army at Temple on the Thursday night for $12. Just both teams coming off the back of a win. Both teams in high scoring, which has not been the case for Temple. Temple put up a good chunk of points in week 4. So I'm going to Army at Temple, and then of course I'm getting in a car and driving as far as possible. I have 2 routes mapped out. I'm going to tell you both of them because I like both of them. So the first one is We talked about Navy. Get to Navy at UAB. Get to Birmingham for noon on the Saturday the 28th. Watch Navy at UAB, and then have a little trip and watch Louisiana Monroe at Troy, which is a 7 p.m. kickoff. So drive from Birmingham to Troy, taking 2 games, taking the Sun Belt, taking the AAC. But we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to drive even further, and we're going to be driving 18 hours from Friday morning through to Saturday morning. We're going to rock up at Tulane at noon. $3. I think George said in our chat that it's actually $2.80 now for a ticket.
It is a very cheap ticket.
What a game! Like USF at Tulane, that is a great game. Alex Golish's offense in USF with Byron Brown at quarterback, and Tulane, who've got like stars on defense and on offense as well, if we're being honest. So we can go there for noon, and we can take a little drive down to South Alabama at LSU, because we're going to go to Death Valley for a night game. And South Alabama is coming off the back of 2 high-scoring, great wins. No one thought they would turn over App State the way they did. Really starting to click South Alabama. Gio Lopez looks like a legitimate, like, top group of 5 quarterback. So give me that. Give me Army Temple, give me USF at Tulane, and give me South Alabama at LSU, and then, I don't know, take me home.
Impressive. I just want to know what has South Alabama done to deserve a night game in Death Valley? I'm like, how did that come about? But I mean, fair play to them, but that's the one that stands out for me. And I cannot believe there were a lot fewer games under under $20 than we've had for the longest time. Normally it's pages of them, so we're a bit short for games. But I couldn't believe that ticket was under $20. But there you go. Anyway, Connor's now panicking because he's seen the level of detail that Oliver's gone into.
That's a lot.
The only thing you missed out was the mileage this time. When you did it with Emily Grace, there was terror in her eyes when you started quoting the actual miles you were driving.
Well, would you like to know how far it is from Philadelphia on the Thursday night to New Orleans for Saturday afternoon?
A lot.
1,223 miles by motor vehicle, my friend.
Not worth it. It's not. I'll tell you, I love college football. That ain't worth it. It's just not. Wow.
Right, Connor. What's your schedule looking like?
Okay, so I would go a little bit atypical here.
Mm-hmm.
Virginia Tech and Miami play on Friday night. All right, remember where I am. I'm based in Orlando. So I'd make that drive, that 3-hour, 15-minute drive down to Coral Gables. I would it's not Coral Gables. It's basically Fort Lauderdale. And I would watch Cam Ward, and tickets for Miami are still cheap, I would assume, because it's Miami football, and Miami football fans are, we don't need to get into that. But I would do that on Friday night. And then here's where, this probably isn't in the spirit of the exercise, but hear me out. Okay, so I live in Orlando. Colorado and UCF play at 3:30 on Saturday. So if I just simply drive back and then I'm there for that, that means I'm not going anywhere for the noon slate. But what I can do, because we have, let's see, not in the Big 12, but in the top 25. So that would be my afternoon. And then I got to be able to make it to a game late at night, right? Like there's nothing probably in driving distance that I can get to late at night. If I left at the middle of that game at halftime, I'm not driving all the way up to, to Alabama or anything like that. So I'm very tempted to say, all right, I might have to rethink this. I was trying to talk it through. It actually doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I love it. I love it when our guests go rogue. Of course, it's a deeply unfair question for us because we've spent most of or certainly Ollie spent most of the week planning out his road trip. To be perfectly honest, as he is naturally gifted at this stuff, but as you could imagine, he did put a bit of effort into it. To be perfectly honest,
I think I ruined my trip by having that 3:30 game. That's the key. I can't have a 3:30 game. I also am very far from like actual games. I was kind of banking on South Florida having a home game this weekend. They don't. That would be a little bit too tough to get to. So realistically, I'm attending 2 games and then being back at home on my butt, and not actually leaving the city of Orlando on Saturday. That's not the
See,
spirit of the game at all.
you see, I love this, right? Because we're just so geographically distant that we just like, I mean, Ollie starting off in Philadelphia, right? And then, traversing and you're like, do you know, I just don't want to leave Orlando. I think I'd be quite happy just to stay in the Orlando metropolitan area for
I'm
one
not leaving the state
Saturday.
of Florida. I'm just gonna sit on my butt. My couch is great. That's trust me. Like my Saturdays are not a whole lot of steps. I love that couch. I love that TV. I'm a big YouTube TV multi-view guy now. So yeah, I think I'm just being a little bit too biased towards my couch, if we're being honest.
Well, that's again another first. You're the first guest to say I was going to sit on my couch all weekend. And good for you. That's all for us on this episode. Brennan, but this time we ask our guest what they're working on and what we should watch out for from them over the next week. But before I do that, congratulations on getting Tim Tebow on your podcast. I never thought I would see Tebow appearing on a college football podcast. So muchos congratulations for that one.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Tim has been I think he's come on about once a year, basically like since we've been doing it. And he's got like Allstate, or yeah, I think mostly Allstate has been kind of what he's been promoting and stuff like that. And you know Laura Rutledge obviously extremely well, and she was good enough to come on a couple of weeks ago. And we've had a really good run on guests lately, and it's been a lot of fun. Saturday Down South podcast, wherever you get your podcast. And then we've got a new series, a video series called College Town that's been rolling out. We've been doing weekly installments of this, 5 different college towns. Wes Blankenship was the guy who ran point on that one. And it's just, if you are one of these people that likes to see where these places are and not just, the games on Saturday, just an incredible peek into Southern culture and everything that goes into it. So Saturday Down South on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, wherever you get social media, we're going to have those clips all over the place, those videos as well. A lot of cool stuff coming down the pipeline Saturday Down South.
Awesome. It's well worth watching. I caught the Wes's one on Twitter or X, I think it was. Wes has been on this podcast a couple of times since he's a great guy. He's got a great sense of humor. Thank you, Connor. That's all from us. As you know, Connor joins a long list of truly awesome guests on this pod. So if you haven't already subscribed, please do. And if you feel the need to review and rate for us. You can, as Connor said, you can follow us also on social media, on X and Instagram. Our social media accounts are at College Chaps, so please give us a follow. We're also on YouTube. Thanks again to Honor and Ollie for the brilliant input. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.